Welcome to the Databricks Skill Builder series. We're glad you're here. The Q&A box is the best place for your questions. It allows everybody else to see them, as well as, and then once the answers are posted, they're coordinated closely with the questions. So with that, I'll hand it over to David. Thanks, David.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks to everyone for joining in today. Today's session's on Unity Catalog and specifically kind of getting a little hands-on on setting it up. And with that, we'll start off on just a few slides. No presentation is complete without presenting a few slides. Just to give you all a background on Unity Catalog very quickly. It'll be very short, I promise. So generally, governance in the data estate is difficult, especially when you're bringing in multiple technologies. In data lakes, you have permissions on files. You have permissions on Hive metadata. You have permissions on data warehouse assets, and even permissions on machine learning models, dashboards, those sorts of things. So all of those are sort of disparate governance models that each require their own technology or own group of people to manage. So on the Databricks Lakehouse estate, Unity Catalog centralizes all that governance for you. So it's one spot to go to govern all of your data assets, whether that's files on the data lake, things like raw images, videos, such as that, or actual Delta tables on the Lakehouse as well, which will coincide with the data warehouse serving of that, as well as being able to govern those ML models and dashboards as well. So that sort of brings all those different personas together into one centralized governance asset. And this is sort of where Unity Catalog fits into the Lakehouse estate here. It's a central spot to service all those different use cases that you'll serve off the data lakehouse, engineering, streaming, machine learning, and even BI serving. So a couple benefits on Unity Catalog. All the governance ways to do things are all ANSI SQL compliant. So there's multiple ways to come in here and actually apply those rules on who can see what. That's through the UI. It can be through ANSI SQL statements, Terraform, APIs, depending on the flavor of how you want to interact with granting those accesses to different people at the individual person level or at group level. A lot of customers use Active Directory to sync in specific user groups and grant access at that level. Another topic that we'll cover today as well, hands-on, will be with the Delta sharing component of this as well. So this is another feature on top of Unity Catalog where you can not only govern your tables, but you can also share that data out with other entities, whether they're Databricks customers. You can share directly from your Databricks Lakehouse to their Databricks Lakehouse, or if they're not on Databricks, a great feature of this is that they don't need to be a Databricks customer in order to receive that data from the Databricks Lakehouse. They can be using pandas on their local machine. They can be using Power BI somewhere else, or their own open source Spark cluster can all consume that share from Unity Catalog. So that avoids sort of that lock-in mentality of a lot of vendors today have data sharing, but you have to be on their technology in order to consume that share. This sort of flips that paradigm on its head and makes sure that no matter what technology you're using on the consumer side, you can actually read that data and be able to share it out. Another great feature on Unity Catalog is the Lineage component of it. So we'll automatically scrape that lineage as code is running and populate the Lineage component inside of Unity Catalog. So as opposed to actually scraping code itself, we'll actually scrape the execution. So it's a lot more accurate, reaching into that Spark acyclic graph and being able to understand where columns are going, where tables are being joined, where all that data is flowing. So that you can visualize it here in the Unity Catalog UI, or we also expose this through APIs so that you can bring this lineage information into different enterprise catalogs like Informatica EDC or Calibra or things like that. And the last feature I think that we're going to cover in the slides here is just unified search. So being able to find specific columns or tables, comments, being able to have insights into those tables as well. Who's querying it often, what types of queries are being ran on it. So this is all centralized in the Unity Catalog. And on top of that, all that audit information will also flow through. So who accessed what table, what operation did they do? Did they select from it? Did they update it? all that information there is stored in Unity Catalog. All right, so we're going to pop out of the slides now. And we're actually going to do a little hands-on. So this demo is going to be a combination of a little bit of live demo and a little bit of pre-baked. Demos are always can be dicey depending. So hopefully everything works out for me here live on the call. So this is the documentation for how to actually set up Unity Catalog on AWS, and we'll walk through these steps as well.
Hey, David.
Yeah.
Can you make this a little bigger?
Yeah, of course. How's that look?
Much better. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for calling that out. So there's a little bit of AWS IAM configuration that we do here. We're going to create an IAM role. And here's the documentation for what that IAM role will look like. These are going to be trust relationships that you build on that role itself. So this is a static value here, and you'll replace your Databricks account ID down here. So this is just a template. You can copy paste. After you configure that, your cross trust relationship, your role will look something along these lines, replaced with your AWS account ID, the role name here in your Databricks account ID. So it's a cyclic relationship to trust that role itself. The next step would be to just create a policy that role can use to access buckets in your AWS S3 locations. So these are the actions required for permissions. If you have a KMS key, you can configure it here. In my example, I took this portion out because I don't have it KMS encrypted. And then just your IAM role with your AWS account ID down here. So it's fairly straightforward. You attach that policy then to your role, and you're kind of off and going. And then we can actually create a metastore. So I'll show you what that looks like in my AWS account here. So I've created an IAM role called UC demo, very special name for this demo here, of course. I've configured a trust relationship between itself and as well as the Databricks UC role here, and filled in my AWS or my Databricks account ID down here. I'll show you where to get that when we get into the Databricks console here in a second. And then that second step was that policy. So that policy just looks like this. Your actions down here, this all standard. What resource? So in my case, I'm just using one bucket for my resource here. This will be the default managed storage location for Unity Catalog. So it's just my name, and the UC demo is the bucket name. We get all that configured. You can assume the role, and we're all good to go on the AWS IAM side after we, of course, create that bucket. I've already pre-created that bucket though. So in the account console, let me move myself out of the way here real quick. So your account ID will be in your accounts console of Databricks here. You just drop down the top right-hand side. Your account ID will be here. You just copy that and use that in your IAM role over there. So the account console, this is where your account admins will go to orchestrate resources, create workspaces, and also create your metastore. So over here, you'll see a data tab. This is the Unity Catalog metastore tab here. I already have one created, but I'm going to create another one here just to show you all what it looks like. So if I create that metastore button here, I'm going to give it a name, call it UC demo 2. Region. So region, typically what we want to do is have the region in the same region as our S3 bucket. We don't want to start to do that cross-region data transfer for egress costs. So we want to select the same region. I want to say, well, I already have a UC bucket in this region, so I'm just going to select a different one right now. We'll put our buckets in here and the IAM role that we created earlier. And we'll say create. And then the second thing it'll do is it'll ask me, do I want to attach this to any workspaces? For this one, I'm just doing the creation demo, so I'm going to skip this portion of it here. So awesome. Now we have 2 metastores. That's how you set up from scratch. I already have this one set up as well. So again, I'm using that S3 bucket path. the IAM credential, and I also enabled Delta sharing down here. So let me go back to my fresh one. I'll show you guys what that looks like. So we have this little checkbox down here to enable Delta sharing. So it gives you the option to not have it on at all. So no Delta sharing can happen. If we want to turn it on, we can set expiration for our authentication tokens. I'm going to say 30 days. We can give ourselves some random name. This can be meaningful to your organization here, and we can enable Delta sharing for that. Awesome. All right, so we've created our metastore. I already had one pre-set up over here. And I have a couple workspaces. Let's go back to my one here. So I already have this metastore attached to a workspace. UC demo 1 is my workspace. So out here, you'll see under the data tab of my workspace here, we'll see more things show up now that is different from a traditional standard workspace. Standard workspaces would have only had a Hive metastore, and you would have only really seen the databases and tables inside of that. Now we have a third level of namespace within our data sets. So within each of these, there will be a catalog, schemas or databases, depending on your terminology, and then tables within here. This one doesn't have any tables yet. So when we create our clusters, in order to utilize Unity Catalog, you'll see when we create a cluster, this one will show up with Unity Catalog label over here. So we know that this cluster is enabled to actually utilize Unity Catalog. And by doing that, we set these access modes. So single user or shared, depending on what exactly you're doing within Databricks. Mine are just single user right now. And then everything else is basically the same within Databricks, right? Selecting what kind of workers you want, how many of those workers, whether or not you want to auto scale those clusters on workload and whatnot. So I already have this cluster created. It's a Unity Catalog enabled cluster. And I'm just going to run some code against this cluster using Unity Catalog. So I'm going to hit run now and kind of walk through the explanation of some of these things here. So since we're on a 3-level namespace now, I create a catalog called UC demo catalog. And if you're coming from traditional Hive metastore with this 3-level namespace now, that introduces another layer in your coding, kind of a nice, easy practice to like migrate from that 2-level to the 3-level is you can use this syntax here, say use catalog. So that way, everything downstream of that will understand that you're trying to use that catalog within Unity Catalog, and then you can start to reference things with a 2-level namespace instead of a 3-level. It'll default to this catalog here. I just create a schema within that catalog. I'm reading some data that's already built into Databricks. It's an online retailer store data. I'm writing to my retail bronze table. So this will become a Delta table. It'll be in the managed location of Unity Catalog. And then I'm creating another silver table, doing some cleanup. This invoice date isn't exactly how I want it to be. So I'm just converting that format to a timestamp format in Spark and writing it out to a silver table. And this is kind of the data that we have there with our nice, neat invoice date now, the way we like it. And then lastly, I'm just doing a small aggregation to create a gold table, summing some quantities by stock code and date on the invoice date. So that's kind of what that looks like down here. So now if we come into visualize Unity Catalog, we can come to this data tab again inside of our workspace. We'll see this UC catalog, demo catalog here. We'll have our schema demo and all 3 of our tables here. So jumping into kind of that lineage scraping that we were talking about, retail gold, let's take a look at the lineage there, because I'm a business analyst. I use the gold table only, but I might want to understand how is this data actually created. So if we look at our lineage graph here, we'll see our gold table is created from the silver table. That silver table is created from this bronze table. And we might want to see how this stock code kind of flows through our different pieces here. Obviously, a very simplified example. We had some joins and things like that. Other tables would show up. But this is a very nice kind of lineage for how our data is actually used here. So this data could be exported out to your enterprise catalogs if you wanted a more holistic view of your entire data estate within your company. Or you can come here and just get the data estate within the lakehouse. Another interesting thing that you'll see show up within Unity Catalog is these information schemas now at each of the catalog levels. So this will start to give you information that you're more accustomed to from a traditional database or warehouse. We can see our tables within here, all this sample data of all the catalogs, what the table is. So you can actually access your metadata programmatically, right? Rather than having to sort of scrape it yourself. So you can come all the way down to columns, things like that. So we can actually interrogate this if we needed to. All right. Next stop I think I want to take you guys on is we were talking about insights. So let's look at this gold table here and see, who's doing what on this table, right? So these insights here will give us frequent queries. I'm only a one-man show here, so I've only ran one query against it, of course. So this is the most frequent query right now, and the most frequent users is me, of course. So this will surface all the insights around each one of your assets within here. What are some common queries? Who's using it very frequently? So you can get some insight into how important this table is, and even back through it with the lineage and see what affects this table. So if you're making changes to upstream tables, you can know the impact on your downstream tables and actually communicate that to your frequent users of these tables, before you actually make that change. So it sort of completes all the dots, so to speak. And lineage is not just relegated to tables only. So you will see notebooks, what notebook is producing this table or modifying this table or reading from this table, what workflows are running and operating on this table, what dashboards are surfaced from this table, and what queries are actually running against that table. So that's all about lineage. Let's get into Delta sharing a little bit. So if I want to share this gold table out to another party, maybe they're a Databricks customer, maybe they're not. But instead of having to basically download this data as CSV and zip it up and send it on an SFTP server, perhaps, or email it out to them, we can set up a Delta share for them to actually read this data in real time. So anytime that they want access to the most up-to-date data, all they have to do is access that Delta share through Pandas or Power BI or what have you on the technology side. So as you ETL data, you no longer have to have a step that packages it up and SFTPs it out. They can just come in directly and query against it. So the sharing I'm going to do is going to be external sharing. So I'm under the impression that there's not a Databricks customer on the other end. They're going to be using Pandas in my made-up scenario here. So I'm going to create a new recipient. I'm going to call him Pandas user. And for external sharing, not Databricks to Databricks, we'll get this activation link for them so that they actually have bearer tokens to utilize when they authenticate into Delta sharing. So I'm going to pop this into here. They'll get a credential file, and this is a one-time download of that credential file. So after the first time, they won't be able to access it. Again, you would have to recreate or rotate their credentials. Okay, so I got my bearer tokens out there. Let's see, come back up to sharing. I want to share some data. We'll call it Pandas user again. So I'm creating an actual share here. I'm going to add some tables to my share. I'm going to add this retail gold. I'm going to save it. And then we'll actually grant that recipient access to that share now. So we've kind of completed the circle. We've created a recipient. They've got their credentials. We've created a share and added some data to that share and then said this recipient can actually access this share. So if we pop over into Python here, I'm just going to update where my credential file is. So I'm using pandas here. So it's a Delta sharing package that's compatible with pandas. We'll run it and walk through the code here. So we're creating a Delta sharing client based on the config profile here, which will I've done something wrong here. That client, essentially we can list the tables in that share. So we have tables, we got retail gold, the pandas user. Let's see, what did I create them as? Pandas user. And then from there, we could load as pandas that table URL. And now we would have a pandas data frame that we could perform, pandas operations on. And very similar approaches on Spark, Power BI, Java connectors as well. So there's a pretty big plethora of connectors out there that can hook into Delta sharing and read it in an open format. So so data search and discoverability. So if we want to search for a particular column or table here, let's see, I want to look at stock code and see all the places that stock code are used. So if I search stock code, it'll pull up, 3 of my tables here that all have stock code inside of them. Notebooks as well. So this notebook references stock code here as well. So we could search tables or specific columns, things like that in there for searchability. And I think that's all the content I have. I'd love to open it up for a Q&A and see if anyone's got any questions that we can help answer. I'm gonna stop sharing so I can actually see some of these. So limitation, Paulo is asking about limitation on one UC setup per region. Yep, so per region, we allow one Unity catalog metastore to be created. So that metastore will service, all of the workspaces in there and be able to be attached to all of them for usability. Best way to migrate existing tables. So there is a wizard. I don't think I have any other tables in here, but essentially there's a wizard that you can go through and tell it to migrate all of these tables inside of this database into Unity Catalog Managed Storage Location. That's one of the easier ways to do it. You can also set up scripting to just simply select star and write into your new catalog location as well. Anybody else have any other questions? All right, well, thanks everybody. I think this recording will be going out shortly. Thanks for attending. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, reach out to your Databricks reps and we'll be happy to help you out. Thanks, everybody.